Hey Kim, sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how to use this thing. All right. Well, thank you for your flexibility, and I do apologize that I had to switch things around a little bit this morning, but who knows? Maybe this will be better that you're able to kind of slow things down and go at your own pace if you need to. I should be available. I will be available as we had previously talked about on Wednesday morning. So I will figure out when we talk next if that would be like 9 or 9:30 your time. But I'm also thinking this might work well because you can start your day on Tuesday whenever you would like. So what I wanted to do first was go through your files that you had already completed. But of course, and reasonably so, you are not done yet because I'm recording this on Sunday night. So that's okay. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to skip ahead. We had talked in our training previously that the next thing that needed to be discussed after we went through these four sample files that you worked on between last Thursday and this coming Tuesday, we discussed that the next thing that needed to happen was, my goodness, I have to find where we are, right here. Reviewing the files from the first round, which I'll do later on, and I'll try to hopefully put these back in order. And then I'm going to talk about the other columns. We're going to talk about file naming, permit types. We are going to talk about owner names, which we've discussed a little bit, addresses, and then the gradual release. And then after that, we will, I'll have you follow these parameters that I just laid out, filling in these other columns, naming the file, and making sure that the addresses are in proper formats. And we'll do all that. I'll release you to do all of that after we go through this. Okay. So here we have I'm going to pull up one of your sample files, one of the short ones. We're going to work on Powell's bow. Again, not sure how to say that. I'm going to just see here if I can pull up something else. I want to have our munging template, our munging guide pulled up. So bear with me here. So in the munging guide, we have the copy of the input template. We have our yellow columns. Wow, that is a terrible color of yellow. I could have sworn I changed that. Anyway, so we went through these last week. We focused on these: city, jurisdiction, permit number, description, project cost, electrical permit declaration, electrical permit cost. We talked about units, owner, general contractor, electrical contractor, license number. So that leaves us, source, address, area, and state. So working backwards, today these other columns that we need to start learning how to fill in include data ridge, zip 9, which is just the zip code, source number, contract number, comments, private, which is basically just a question of whether it's private or public, and not construction type. That's something that's going to come later. We are going to talk about date permit. We are going to talk about period number, and we are not going to talk about the rec number. So the rec number and the construction type, I want you to know, is something that the construction type we're going to start training on later on this week. I think Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how things are going. And the record number is even going to come after that. And the record number, the reason for that is just that with a record number is something that has to be pulled directly from our database. So it's just kind of I don't want to get you onto the server or the database until we absolutely have to. So we'll hold off on that. So let's go through these. So starting with period. The period number is basically which quarter that we're working on. So when we're working with a newer client, that can be a low number. When we're working with 46, I think we're on something like 102. So let's click away and do the period number. Find the period number that we're on. So where we can find that, we can always find the period number in the munging checklist. Okay. So in the munging checklist, I'm going to have this little thing here, scrolling down across the column, or the tabs rather, on the bottom, and we have period dates. And period dates are important, and we'll get into these as far as the date orig and the date permit in a minute here. But period dates, this period date tab is also important for finding which period we're on. So I'm always looking for input about better ways to organize this. I'm going to pause for a second. So I just want to say too, like, definitely pause this whenever, so you can click through it yourself. And if you're not following me, and do feel free to give me a call if you're unclear on something. I'm definitely available by phone. After like 10 your time, that is, which is 8 my time. Okay, so what we have to look at first when we're trying to figure out what area, or I'm sorry, what period we're working is, we have to first think about what area we're in. So for you, you're working in 46 right now. So we have the areas across the top in the first row. And then coming down to row 3 is where we designate period, date orig, date permit, and what date that information is due. What I'm looking at here is we need to look and see what month the permit was issued in. So we know that we are looking at data. We are in February now, and sometimes we work it with older data, or we sometimes even work with data from the current month. But in this case, we know that we are working with a January permit file. We can find out what the date that it was issued in 2 ways. One, it can either be, it'll be partially the name of the file when you download it. 2, it might be a way that you searched through the data and you found that date. Or 3, it may be, there may be an actual date on the individual permit information. But I just know off the top of my head that we are working on January data. So here is our date. We are in 46, and our data was issued, our permits were issued in the month of January. That means that our period number is 103. So just a quick note here, and we're going to come back to this, and I'm going to show you a document that I hope will be a little more helpful. So period is 103. The date orig is 1/1/2021. So it's always going to be the first. Date orig is always the first. Date permit, on the other hand, is, as it says up here, you want to use the actual date. Now there are exceptions to that. It says unless from an older period. So with the data like we have, which the ones that you're working on this month, we are working in a current period. This is, I'm trying to think of how to explain that. So, okay, so let's fast forward and pretend that it's March. And let's pretend that Poulsbo was lazy or just behind, and they managed to not get us their January data until March. So in that case, we're no longer in the current period. So we are, if it's March, we're looking at data that are old. If it's data from January. So we're in period 104, and we're trying to take stuff from 103. Oh, I'm not sure if that's really making sense. But what I'm trying to say is, so we have, our periods are 3 months long. So if we're in 103, like we are right now, this is probably a better way to say it. So if we're in 103 right now, and I realize, hey, guess what, Kim? Poulsbo just gave us their August data, and that's from period 101. So if that's the case, we don't even care anymore what the date of that actual permit is here, as it says here, unless it's from an older period. So if it's January and we're putting it in, we want to know, was it issued on January 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, all the way up? But if it's from August and we're sitting here in period 103 and we have data that's this old, just put the first of the month, because it doesn't matter anymore. We just get it in there. And that does matter. sorry, I'm just thinking here. That definitely does matter because it has to do with the way that it's going to show up in the database. So that's why that matters. I'm going to make just a quick note here about deadlines. If you look at this here, munging due. Whenever we have a munging deadline, it means it's the end of the quarter. So the end of the quarter is going to come, and when we get to the end of the quarter, we want to get that data in to the database as soon as possible. So that's partially why I have you working in 46 currently, is because I want to make sure that I'm not giving you something that has a quick deadline coming. So for instance, 48 right now has a deadline due this month. So they have period 53 that's due for January data, but that also includes December and November data. So this is period 53, all 3 of these months. And so we have the January data that's due in 48, and this is our due date for it. So like today. So I think, well, I guess it would be, you should be listening to this on the 16th. So it was due yesterday for period 48. Okay. That is period date, or I'm sorry, period number. So now we know. So let's go back. So bringing us all back together, we are on period 103 because we're working with this January data in area 46. So let's go ahead and click back. And, well, darn it, I cannot seem to get 2 things to stay open on my iPad. One moment here, bear with me. Okay, so we're here again. So clicking back over. So we just talked about period, and now we know that our period is 103. Now we're going to talk about, so we touched on date permit and date orig a little bit. I want to dive a little deeper here and take you to another hopefully helpful document that I have. So date permit here in column C, and then of course we also have date orig over here in column Y. Man, I'd like to figure out a way to do this. Let's see. Bear with me a minute here while I see if I can open a couple things at once. You might be sitting here going, oh, I know how to do it. I know how to do it. I wish someone would tell me how to do it because I do not know. All right. Let's see. So this is a little thing that I jotted down in my notes here called date. Here it is. How to determine which date is correct. And I created this a few years ago to help people. And so we have date permit. So basically the question we want to ask ourselves when we look at date permit is we say, when was the permit issued? So date permit wants to know, when was the permit issued? And if it's in the current period, we want to choose the date it was actually issued. So if that date is available. Again, sometimes we just get a report and it just says November. This is your November file, and it gives you no date whatsoever. So whenever possible, if we're working in that current period, we want to choose the date it was actually issued. So again, when you're looking at an example file here, you're going to say, if it's Poulsbo, then we're going to say, hey, what was the date it was issued? And if we have that it was issued on January 3rd, plug it in. Again, if the date if we're thinking about date permit and we're working with any previous period, in other words, old data, we're just going to choose the first of the month closest to the issue date that fits in the current period. We will get into that when we get to an example. I expect that you will ask me about that when you find an example where you're entering old data. It can just be really overwhelming to think about right now. But I'm just going to tell you a little bit more. And again, I expect you to ask me about it later because it's a little overwhelming to me either. But basically, when I gave you that example, I said, hey, if we get some data that's from August and we're sitting here in period 103 and we have data from August, which is like, I guess, period 101, then we have a problem. And that just means that we can't be putting the actual issue date in there. We want to put something that fits in the current period. So even though that data might be from August, our date permit, when we have that old data, is going to be something in the current period. So another way to think of that is basically our date permit needs to fit into the current period. Otherwise, it basically won't go in. So if we had some data from August, then it would say something like, it would say, sorry to keep flipping back and forth there. So if we had something from August and we're looking at period 103, which goes from December through February, we would want that date permit to say 12/1/2020, because that is the oldest date in our current period. So again, date permit, we want it to be within the current period. If it's in the current period, we want to make sure that we're choosing the actual issue date. So month, actual day, and year. Data Ridge, which is that further over column in our input template, which means date original, of course. For the date original, we're always choosing the first of the month in which the permit was issued every time. So here are some examples down here, which you can certainly read, but I'll skim through really quick. So when it's a current period, we have a permit was issued on October 10th, 2018. And you are planning to update it on upload it on December 13th, 2018. Therefore, you are uploading it to the current period. Date permit equals 10/10/18. Date orig equals 10/1/18. So again, this is within the current period. So we want the date permit to have the month as it is here. And we want the date orig to be, the month and the day for date permit. And for date orig, we want it to have just the month and then the first of the month. Number 2 in the examples, if it's a past period, the same permit issued on October 10th, 2018 is going to be uploaded on February 27th, 2019. Therefore, you are not uploading it within the period it was issued, which it would have, in that case, would be P94. You would be uploading it in P95. So the date permit needs to be the oldest month in the current period, which in this case was 12/1/18. And the date orig needs to be the month it was actually issued in and the first of that month. So date orig, 10/1/18. Always stays the same, whether it's a past period or current period. Date permit changes whether it's the current or past period. I'm going to pause there for a second and just say I expect you to write that down and say, hey, we should talk about this more, because I'm sure that that's a little bit confusing when we can't have an actual conversation about it. So I put a note down here too. Note, date permit changes depending on whether you're uploading within the period, whereas date orig always stays the same, which is what we just talked about. And then important too, the period number must always align with the date permit. So put another way, your date permit must fall within the period. So that's why it has to be that, why it has to bring up that, or why it has to be the most far back. So even if you're working in the past, it still has to be that far back date, and still fall within the period in which you are entering the data. Whew. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here, and I'm sure you would like to as well. And then when I come back, or in the next little session here, we are going to discuss, I'm going to show you where we would enter these and what some real examples would look like, and then we'll go into the private zip, comments, contract, source number. Okay.